Absolutely amazing. Don't worry, it's been a long day. There are not a lot of panels left. In fact, there's, that was amazing. Thank you. While we're transitioning, I want to add my thinking about the future. As I was listening to them, I just kept imagining. I really hope that in the future, the youth have the opportunity to choose. I'm 53. I remember thinking about what I wanted to do, and I had all the choices in the world. And this generation, they're growing up in a very different world. I've had a lot of conversations with my sons who are about their age, who are trying to decide what to study and what to do. One of my sons has a love of literature and history. And right now he's doing everything he can to get skills, first aid skills, etc., to be useful during the climate emergency. And I can tell you as a mother, it's much harder to watch your son to be arrested than it is to get arrested, actually. So I wish for a time when they don't have to do that. We've heard a lot about the proliferation of fossil fuels today, but now we're going to hear about the proliferation of ideas and initiatives that are helping to tackle the challenge of fossil fuels and create a path for international cooperation. We'll hear from Peter Witters from the Institute for Sustainable Development, also now hosting the Beyond Oil and Gas Initiative, BOGA. We'll hear from Jojo Mehta from Stop Ecocide International, Charles Santiago, member of the Parliament in Malaysia, who has been one of the founders and the energy behind our Parliamentarians for a fossil-free future. We'll hear from Sebastián Navarro from CC35 Capital Cities, and finally from Harjeet Singh from the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. We've asked each of them to approach this like some kind of TED-style talk. They have 7 minutes and 7 minutes only to come up and explain to you and pitch you their big idea for how we are going to solve some of these issues. So without further ado, I welcome to the stage Peter Witters from International Institute for Sustainable Development, hosts to the BOGA Secretariat. Peter.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. No pressure at all then, especially following the last panel. And Farzana just said, just after Kayla, I can't follow you. How can I follow that? So thanks, firstly, big thanks, Zipporah and everyone for such an excellent set of meetings today. So I'm representing today the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is a first movers alliance of governments who are looking to get to the managed phase out of oil and gas production and exploration. Before I do so, I just want to take you out this room for a minute and just think about yesterday evening or a recent Saturday evening or something. And just imagine it's relatively early in the evening, it's 6:30 or so, and you're trying to decide what to do. Are you going to go out with some friends? Are you going to do some cooking? Are you going to read a book? Are you going to clear your to-do list? What are you going to do? The world is your oyster. You've got loads of freedom. Of course, this is a theoretical abstract. This never kind of happens, but just imagine it does for a while. But then you think to yourself, well, actually, I've just got to catch up with this show on Netflix that I've been really wanting to watch. So you stick an episode on, and it's entertaining. You look at it. It's going well. You think, and you've taken a short-term decision there. You've decided that the best thing you can do right now is watch that show on Netflix. And you think, I'll watch the second episode as well. It gets more and more engaging. You're starting to think to yourself, hang on a minute, what's going to happen to this couple? They're obviously going to get together, but when's it going to happen? Or will that spaceship get fixed on time? Or were the Vikings really like that, or was it something else? And before you know it, we've all been there. It's 11 o'clock at night, and you've wasted the entire evening. And what I'm trying to show here is that the sum of a whole bunch of short-term decisions is a long-term outcome. And I think that's exactly what governments have done with oil and gas. Every year there's a reason why you can't make progress on oil and gas phase out. energy prices are too high this year, or last year it's because unemployment was too high, or next year we've got a problem with there's a community where there's not enough work, or there's always some sort of reason. So what governments have basically done is by continually delaying taking action, we've ended up in a long-term situation where we've had huge overexploitation of oil and gas. We've heard all the stats. Only 40% of the oil and gas that we've found at the moment can be exploited. We need to break this cycle. So the question then becomes, what can governments do now? And I want to give sort of two really simple principles here. First one is the oldest, most unoriginal cliche in the world: when you're in a hole, stop digging. But it is very, very apt to the oil and gas world. Second one is get on the right path and stay on it, or you won't get to the destination you want to get to. We all know the destination we want to get to, including the governments. They know they want to get to a fossil fuel transition. They want to get onto renewables, but they keep delaying this decision taking. So where does the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, BOGA, come in? It's following those two principles. The first one, stop digging when you're in a hole. Firstly, their members, their core members, of which there are currently eight governments, have agreed to no more new licensing, concessions or leasing for oil and gas exploration and production. And secondly, getting on the right path, they've publicly stated in the commitment that their path will now be aligned with Paris from now on. And governments just have to stay on these principles. So can they break the cycle? A couple of examples from the membership. Denmark is one of the co-chairs. It has been, in many of the recent years, one of the top 2 oil producers in Europe. It's not a huge producer, but it's significant. But if you now go to the port of Esbjerg up on the west coast, that is now a center for the offshore wind industry, not just the offshore oil industry. And they've taken that commitment. Quebec is another member. It's a subnational government. It's sitting on quite a large reserve of natural gas under the surface. The classic North American solution to this is dig it all out of the ground. Quebec, on the 12th of April this year, signed Bill 21 into law, or the Parliament's approved it, which basically said it is now illegal to exploit oil and gas on Quebec territory, and all drilling has to stop in the next 3 years. This is a world-leading commitment. So these commitments are happening. We hear a lot about political will. To my mind, a lot of that is about confidence. Governments, we've heard so much today about how complicated our economic systems are, our energy systems, our social systems. They're all interlinked as well, makes it even more complicated. But there are some relatively simple things we do, and we know from the BOGA membership and from other governments around the world, a lot of those are about legal issues, they're about planning on economic and economy, and they're on energy and on just transition. And the BOGA members have, they haven't just made a high-level commitment, they've done a lot of serious consideration, and they've taken policy decisions on the basis of those. So here are some examples that they can share amongst themselves and share with the wider world. And another example here is there's a lot of talk anecdotally about the Energy Charter Treaty and investment agreements, how that's going to break progress. Well, all those BOGA members signed up to BOGA knowing all this. They don't think there's an issue here. And on the other side, of course, they also, by taking this commitment, are ensuring themselves against the climate litigation cases that are so helpfully now being raised by many in this room and many around the world. So we need to help build the confidence of more countries to take these commitments. We need to answer questions about cost and benefit of the change, about the pathways that need to happen to help with the communities of practice, to feed in usefully, diplomatically, we feel, into all the international processes and forums and organizations, which are so helpful. One very nice thing, BOGA was launched with a lot of fanfare at the last COP and was described by somebody who I can't remember as the initiative the world needs. If that was you, I'm very sorry, I've forgotten who said that. So BOGA members, follow the two principles. If you're in a hole, stop digging. Get on the right path and stick on it. So I hope I've proven today that BOGA is very important to the managed transition of oil and gas going forward. And I also hope today that I've proved conclusively that BOGA is better than Netflix. And then possibly as well, I've chosen the wrong comparator. I think what we're really looking for here is just do it. Thank you.
But is it as addictive? Let's hope. Peter, thank you. That was, that was fantastic. Now we have Jojo Mehta from Stop Ecocide International. And also just one note, that is not Calo Fiki. Sebastián, our apologies. Somehow that was a mix-up on the slide. We know who you are, and I will introduce you properly. Thank you so much, Jojo, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Hi. It's great to see you all. I'm going to put myself a 7-minute timer and see if I can keep to it. So, I co-founded Stop Ecocide International back in 2017 alongside UK barrister and legal pioneer Polly Higgins, the late Polly Higgins. She's my dear departed friend now. And our initiative aims at one very simple goal: to criminalize mass damage and destruction of nature. In other words, to put ecocide alongside genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. Now, we've heard a lot in various events over the last couple of days about what needs to be done, and very much about why it needs to be done. What everybody is possibly wondering in the back of their minds is, how is it going to be done? Given that all these agreements are being discussed, whether we've got the Paris Agreement, the CBD, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Plastic Treaty that's just beginning to be discussed this week, and many, many more. How are they going to materialize? What is the mechanism that will help do that? And we believe that the criminal law framework has the unique capacity to assist with that. So, putting in place an outer guardrail, if you will, something that can say this far and no further. This movement has grown incredibly fast over the last 3 years, and it's been a big dot-joining exercise, realizing how many grassroots campaigns, politicians, lawyers, diplomats are interested in moving this forward. Some have said, how can you put ecocide alongside genocide? Well, I think we've all heard over the last couple of days why that is the case. The consequences are what we are looking at in this instance, you know. Of course, the intent may not be the same or as evil as genocide. We may be talking about collateral damage, but we're talking about collateral damage that threatens not just part of a people, but the whole of human civilization as we know it. So we need to acknowledge that that level of damage is as bad, is as important to consider, is as serious, is as dangerous as those other international crimes. Because there is a gap. There is a gap in environmental law. Environmental law is a body of law that's grown up over the last 40 to 50 years, since the first UN conference in 1972, right here in Stockholm, where the word ecocide was used for the first time by the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, who described severe destruction as ecocide and said it required urgent international attention. And it still does. Because we have a very deeply ingrained mindset that has grown up over centuries that makes us very separate to nature. It makes us separate from each other. It makes us competitive against each other, between nations, between ourselves and the natural world. And placing ecological harm alongside harm to people and harm to property actually goes a very long way. It's subtle, but it's profound, the difference that that can make to how we approach our relationship with nature. And it gives a basic level of understanding that it is fundamentally wrong to destroy the environment. So protecting our vulnerable and vital ecosystems, creating a legal safety rail, but also strengthening existing environmental law. Because although existing environmental crimes already are 4th most profitable in the world in terms of criminal activity, they are in no way approached at a commensurate level in terms of enforcement. And so providing this real kind of basic foundational principle around that the worst harms are actually an international level crime is super important. It's also important to do it at the international level because the worst perpetrators are transnational corporations that have the ability to move from one jurisdiction to another. So creating coherence by putting an international law in place, particularly also for those countries where they may not be able to rely on the national legal systems, and they may need to know that there's a tool there. All of those environmental defenders who currently are framed as the criminals interrupting legitimate business activity. When there's a question mark over the business activity, Suddenly you have a 180-degree flip in that framing. Those people are no longer criminals. Those people are moral upholders of the law. So it's a profound framing change that comes with that as well. Another aspect is that when we talk about laws and putting laws in place, and particularly if we talk about them with lawyers and policymakers, they often talk about and want to think about how will this work in practice? How do we practically, how will prosecutions take place? What exactly will they address? And all of this. Now, environmental law has mostly been in the regulatory sphere, where it's all about how much of this toxin can you use in this circumstance before it crosses a certain line. But with criminal law, we're looking at drawing the really profound moral red lines. I mean, you could think of it, if you like, as a kind of almost a health and safety law in a criminal way for the planet. And when you're approaching health and safety, you don't say, how do we nearly break someone's head open, but not quite? I mean, you just don't think of it that way. You think, how do we avoid breaking someone's head open? And that is the attitude that we need to cultivate in regard to nature. We have a deep, deep taboo around damaging people, quite rightly so. You're not going to go to a government and say, could I have a license for killing 500 people for my new infrastructure project, please? It's not even going to cross your mind. But we don't think that way about nature, and we need to, in a very practical way. We need to start thinking about damage to nature in that way. And the other aspect of this is that, I'll come back to what I started to say and got diverted from, which is that when you speak to lawyers about this, they look at the practicalities of what's going to happen when the law's in place. What people don't realize is that the real window for strategic change starts now. And it starts now because that is when people can see the law coming. And we're already, this is not actually a pitch. I'm not pitching you. I'm actually just telling you this is coming. I don't need you to buy into it. It's already happening. So from a standing start a few years ago, Vanuatu was the first nation state to specifically ask for this at the ICC, the International Criminal Court. We now have over 20 member states of the ICC talking about this at parliament or government level. We have a massive demand from the youth movement worldwide. We also have it coming from NGOs. It's been coming up in all the preparatory meetings for this conference this week. So we see Stockholm as one step and an inevitable approach of this law. And that brings me back to that key point. When you see the law approaching, you know it's coming over the horizon. That's when you put your strategic hat on. That we're already seeing investors asking governments to put this law in place, actively asking them to, because it creates the stability, it creates the framework within which they can move, and they can say, okay, in 4 or 5 years' time, exactly when we don't know, but we estimate around that. Oh, look at that, I've nearly done it. That was my alarm. That was my daughter when she was 1. When they can see that coming, that's when they start changing. That's when they start thinking about it. And we're already hearing anecdotally of extractive companies changing their policies because they've seen the definition of ecocide that emerged last year. And I'll finish with that. Sorry, I know I've gone over a tiny bit. Our foundation convened last year an international panel of legal experts from around the world and different legal backgrounds to come up with a consensus definition of ecocide. And it's beautifully concise. It fits on the back of a business card. The core text of it. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. That is the starting point for this law. It's approaching, and people are starting to use it as a lens to look through it and say, what does this mean we can and can't do? And that makes everything else easier. Ecocide is not a silver bullet. It's not like it will fix everything. But creating this new international crime if we don't do that, it's going to be hard to fix anything. So we see this as a necessary but not sufficient condition. It's a first step. It's on its way. Get behind it. Thank you.
Wow, congratulations, Jojo. That's incredible progress in 5 years. Profound. I'm really excited to welcome to the stage now Charles Santiago, who's a Malaysia Member of Parliament, one of the initiators of the Parliamentarians' call for a fossil-free future. Charles, there you
are. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zafara, for the introduction. I am on a recruitment drive right now. I'm here to recruit, though. How many of you want a job? Oh, yeah. But here, I'm recruiting members of parliament. They have a special responsibility. They have been elected by members. He's a member of parliament, yes, and he's also a member. So you can't apply for the job, though. You can't recruit. Well, so I'm on a recruitment drive. I'm asking people to join our effort. Parliamentarians call for a fossil fuel-free future. My God, what's such long. Anyway, that's what I'm here to recruit, and we'll be recruiting. We have started recruiting 2 months ago, am I right, Lily? 2 months ago, we started recruiting, and as of now, we have 279 members of parliament, as well as from 69 countries who have joined the parliamentarians' call. So the effort today, tomorrow, the day after, and so on and so forth, is to expand the recruitment because we have lots of work to do, though. We have really lots of work to do. And what are we planning to do, or what could we potentially do? One, we could ask in parliaments, our respective parliaments, whether it's in Europe, America, or even in Asia, for a carbon audit, for example. So parliamentary members or members of the select committee can actually ask the government for a carbon audit. That's one that they can do. Number two, they could push for inquiry on fossil fuel management of the country, though. How are they managing it, and how are they going to reduce it, and ask the government to have a phase-out mechanism or some kind of a timeline, so that governments are held responsible and also held accountable for all of their activities, what they say at the country level, at the national level, as well as their international obligations. We also can ask governments or force governments to come up with a plan, This is something that can be done, should be done, and should be encouraged through parliaments. When I read this document, Leadership Dialogue by the UNEP, I think, this is kind of a summary document that appeared on 19th April 2022, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, though. I have lots of comments on this, but I'll keep the comments aside. But there is no mention of the role of a very important stakeholders, very important and powerful people who are members of parliament, though. They have no role to play in transforming the world. This is a bloody shame, though. A UN document that does not give a powerful group of people who make decisions, who make laws, power to make decisions when it comes to environment, when it comes to fossil fuels. This is disgrace. Very disgraceful, though. Don't you think so? So if you think it's disgraceful, get your parliament members to join us, though. The parliamentarians call. Can? Yes? Yes. Okay. So now what do? So we can ask force governments to come out with the phase-out plan. And we are also thinking, we thought about it yesterday, we thought about it last night, to maybe in the beginning of next year or end of this year, an international inquiry on fossil fuel management of companies, of governments, inter-agencies, banks, and so on and so forth. A global inquiry on where we are going in the way we manage fossil fuels and how to cut it down and how to move towards renewable energy. I think these are some of the steps that we can do. And I think in general, we can talk about new expansion of oil, gas, and coal production, something that we are committed to. Number two, phase out existing oil, gas, coal in a manner that is fair and equitable, and the list goes on, and also to forge new international commitments and treaties complementing the Paris Agreement. These are some of the things that we're thinking about. This is a kind of an embryonic effort, very new effort 2 months ago, and thanks to Lydie, who's at the back, sitting there, who started to think about this, and then we got a discussion with friends from Bangladesh, and then later in Europe, and also in Africa. So we have at this time 279 members of parliament who have joined us, and I encourage you, if you are members of parliament, to sign up. And number two, if you have friends in your networks which involves members of parliament, send them our way. We will reach out to them, though. On that note, I'm again here to recruit. Yeah? But bring the progressive parliamentarian, though. Don't bring a pro-fossil fuel guy, though. We don't want them. We want them out of parliament, though, yes? Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Recruiting, successfully recruiting here in the room. And the global inquiry on fossil fuels, very exciting idea from the Parliamentarians Forum. And now we have Sebastián Navarro, Secretary General of CC35 Capital Cities. Sebastián.
Bueno, vamos a hacer trabajar un poco a las traductoras en español y en inglés en español un poquito. Así ponemos el español donde debe estar, ¿no? A la altura del inglés. Too much English, less Spanish. Yeah. Okay. After what I am about to say, you better get my picture out of there. I want to thank the Nordic Council and the Stanley Center for this invitation and congratulate Sephora for this amazing initiative and the team, them for this solid, super initiative, and that will be support from the capitals of the CC35 to eradicate fossil fuels at the local level and achieve binding emission reduction legislation. It's an honor to be in these Swedish lands that show the world their leadership towards the decarbonization of the economy. Sweden will be a very great example of work. I also greet on behalf of my mayors of Tegucigalpa, Santo Domingo, Santiago de Chile, and San Salvador and myself, say hello to the Vanuatu delegation, Bob Lokman, the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, Inger Andersen, the UN Environment, the mayor of this conscious capital, Kevin Lincoln, and to my Latin American sister, Nemonte Nemquino, and Gigi Bastida, with whom we have shared the list of the 100 most influential Latinos globally for our action to stop the climate crisis. Quiero enviar un especial saludo a los pueblos indígenas por salvaguardar el capital natural, a pesar de jugarse su propia vida por una lucha que es de todos los seres humanos. Y haciendo dos reflexiones sobre lo que decía Nemonte Nemquino. La primera reflexión es, todos los grandes inventos de la humanidad se hicieron observando la naturaleza. Todos. Lo segundo es, como decía Nemonte, que dejemos de perder tiempo, qué es lo urgente y qué es lo necesario. Lo necesario nos va a seguir gastando tiempo y dándole mucho más tiempo a quienes siguen jugando con el futuro de la humanidad. Lo urgente es si vamos a ser la generación y somos la última que lo puede hacer, si vamos a seguir siendo los cómplices de un sistema de muerte o si vamos a crear las nuevas columnas de un sistema que proteja la vida, que ponga la protección de la vida como una nueva forma de gobierno. Y eso es clave, porque la primera va a seguir manteniendo nuestra comodidad y la segunda, la urgencia, va a ser que tengamos que salirnos, que perder la comodidad que estamos teniendo hoy. En ese sentido, estamos viviendo una crisis en Europa con la invasión de Rusia y para mí es muy importante entender que tal vez es mejor tener 4 inviernos de frío que seguir alimentando a un asesino que sigue lucrando con el dinero de todos los europeos. We arrived at Stockholm+50, where Europe has the opportunity to abandon its dependence of fossil fuels since that crisis in the 1970s. After 26 climate summits, where the majority of the member countries of the UNFCCC could not assume their commitments. If everyone had understood that the clean energy transition represented a safeguard for whole humanity, we would have avoided the bombs that are falling right now a few steps from Stockholm. The West appreciates the courage of the prime ministers of Sweden and Finland to break the historical neutrality, strengthen democracies, and end the blackmail of oil, coal, and gas. The two of them understood that national security is indivisible from the global security. All of us must also understand it. It was also becoming clear that we can no longer wait for the national government and that the true guarantor of the Paris Agreement will be the local governments, simply because the earth can't wait any longer. That is why we announced here the subnational actions can lead the change toward the eradication of fossils. With the UNDP, will be convened the first climate parliament of the 35 capital cities of the Americas in the United Nations Week in 2023. We can connect it with the initiative that you carry out with the parliamentarians with the aim of declaring the climate emergency in all municipal councils at the rest of levels of government. We will present at COP27 in Egypt the first carbon program and the subnational protected areas program for cities and for the states to protect areas that will place economic incentives for conservation for the 30 plus per 30 and guarantee accelerate the decarbonization. We will expose with the partners of the satellites, the exposed serial deforesters through satellites so that global citizenship and the media know them by name and the surname. We are going to ask for the support of each one of you. Count of us to work together. Remember, the battle will be won or lost in cities, but also in the oceans and in the forest. We have to change a system that is an incentive care for another, where the protection of lives become a new form of government. Friends, if we were there together, we are closer to a global passport hand in hand with the digitalization, to a parliament of the earth, with representatives elected by the citizens, both that decide of the issues common for the survival of humanity. on the disappearance of the physical money, Sweden is the first example, under the blockchain architecture. We are closer to a new humanity that must decide if it is willing to give up part of this comfort for a possible planet. If we so decide, we have to tighten of our belt and a turbulent trip, but better an uncomfortable transition than the end of our civilization. We have to massively tell an old system that this is time has run out, a time for excessive corruption, lack of sensibility, and the availability to provide solutions. We need a policy that leads us to the fourth generation of universal rights, a universal basic coverage that contains clean and free transportation in urban areas, clean and free energy in rural areas, and the communications for every inhabitant on the earth. And you, the young people especially, must be part of the generation that prepared to govern with these values. The war will be divided between those of us who are willing to protect life on this planet or those who go directly and without the scale to a collective suicide. There is only one possible future, one that cleans the generation that have the government with blood-stained hands, and that lead us to the self-destruction of our civilization. Among them, we will be especially remembered and named within the first group of losers of the ecological transition, a name that prompted us to fight stronger than ever for life and freedom on this planet, a name that will remain in the space of history another war criminal. We have to stop Vladimir Putin and the upcoming oil, gas, and coal traffickers. We stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastián, for your passion, your words, and we look forward to the first Climate Parliament in New York. Last but definitely not least, please join me in welcoming Harjeet Singh from the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative.
Hello, everyone. Almost the last panel and the last speaker here. Very nice. Okay, let's start. You have heard a lot about the crisis, and many of you are aware, and you have been listening a lot of data. So I was wondering what exactly I should be talking about. Let me, to set the context, let me repeat some of the things that you have heard throughout the day, and then talk about the bold idea that I'm part of. So climate action failure topped weapons of mass destruction in the ranking of global risk by the World Economic Forum in a report that focuses on global threats. We know that. You heard Sapora reminding us that 86% of carbon dioxide in the last decade came from fossil fuels. We know that despite increased renewable energy investments, the global share of energy still depends on fossil fuel in terms of 80%. So that's where we are. The current level of extraction that's happening, and it's going to take us way, way beyond the 1.5 degree target that we have. And we are also facing the climate crisis right now. You talk about heat waves and storms, floods, and wildfires. We are seeing how that's destroying people's homes, land, farms, and millions are now being forced out of their homes. I come from India. You have all been listening about the unprecedented heat waves in India, Pakistan, and the nearby countries. And at the same time, when you hear that the solutions that are being talked about are, we will go for more voluntary action, or as individuals, you also heard from young people that, no plastics campaign and do more kind of whatever we can save, reuse and recycle, but we know it's not going to get us where we need to, because there are just 100 companies that are responsible for more than 70% of emissions. And that's the inequality we are talking about. And to make you even more angry, you must know that the production and burning of coal, oil, and gas was subsidized by $5.9 trillion in 2020, which comes to $11 million a minute. $11 million a minute. So is it us who are responsible for the crisis? And we know all this data. There's a lot of talk about green transition and clean energy. Of course, we need all of that. But we have been campaigning a lot for green energy and green transition. But why we could not get enough progress? We got the convention in 1992. We got Paris Agreement. What's wrong with the system that we are not able to make progress? And we are still dependent on fossil fuels the way we were 10 years ago. There's something massively wrong. And my analysis is that we have been only talking about what we need to do. We have been describing that cake of responsibility, but we did not talk about how to cut that cake and who needs to take that pie to act. And that has been the missing piece over the last 30 years. Yes, the convention does talk about the responsibility of rich countries, and that's where I would say we as campaigners also failed in the climate space. We focused too much on protecting our own interest, our own countries, and we did not really articulate that we come to the UN space for global justice. The reason we are facing the crisis is because of global inequality. There are a handful of countries and corporations who have caused the crisis, and yet we were stuck in some of the communication campaigns, and we did not really call out who had to play that role and how we cut the cake. And somehow the terminologies of equity and justice were described as toxic. And look at where we are right now, how disasters are hitting us. We have not made any progress whatsoever because we did not focus sufficiently on how and who has to move. And this is exactly where the fossil fuel treaty comes in, because that's what we are talking about. We cannot just expect Angolas and Azerbaijan and Nigeria to all come to the same finish line as Norway, Canada, the US, UK, Australia, without providing them support, without looking at history on how colonialism, racism has kept them there and how they are living the legacy of that colonialism, and they are stuck with the fossil fuel economy. We did not talk about that. We had such a narrow way of looking at climate. We did not connect all these crises, and the reality is we have not moved an inch. So the time has come to talk about how, to talk about a plan that is needed to achieve that just transition that we all have been talking about. And unless we talk about equity, unless we talk about justice, we will not get there. We have to talk about how we are going to provide support to these countries who are not responsible for the crisis but are facing the brunt of the crisis. We have to come up with some very clear ideas, and that's where the treaty talks about how we have to stop the exploration now, how we have to phase out equitably, how we have to achieve a just transition, and some of the elements that we have to, the nitty-gritties and the nuts and bolts that we are working on is how do we increase the transparency and accountability of the fossil fuel companies and governments and their investment. That's how the idea of global registry, which has been missing. We need a full framework that's going to help some of these countries who are dependent on fossil fuels, and we have to make sure that the just transition works for all the workers and communities, and that the legal framework and policy and economic tools that we have to work on and develop so that we can talk about the how part, which we have not done enough. So I would say politicians so far have been quite successful in dividing us between developing and developed countries and rich and poor. The time has come to unite. The time has come to talk about workers around the world and apply the equity principle and say that's what is needed. And we have to call out our leaders, and particularly the ones who are responsible for the crisis, and say this is exactly what you have to do. And those specifics are coming out of this treaty initiative. So I would invite you to join us in endorsing the treaty. Talk to your leaders about it and compel others to do so that they also join the movement and act and not just talk. Thank you.